and welcome to this special edition of Sports Talk with Island Stats. I'm joined by the President of World Athletics, Lord Sebastian Coe. First of all, thank you very much for joining me and giving us this opportunity to get some insight into the world of track and field and athletics. Obviously, it's been a trying time for you and your organization over this COVID pandemic. How has the virus changed the sport?
It's changed it in many ways. And look, it's affected the whole ecosystem of our sport. Clearly, we've lost events. We lost the Olympic Games, the biggest moment in our 4-year calendar. We lost the Carifta Games, which was going to be on your beautiful island. So, this has been a challenge, but the great disruptor we have to accept are the most important people in our lives, and those are the athletes. And that has been the hardest. I think it's been the hardest element of the pandemic to bear. If you're a competitor, and I was a competitor many, many years ago, I know how challenging it is when you are really fighting the odds every day, trying to keep fit, trying to find competition. And in this case, I can't think of another time in my life as a competitor or as an administrator where we've been confronted with so many challenges and mainly about how to figure it out and help the athletes figure it out.
Once a competitor, always a competitor. So as a competitor now in administration, do you kind of think along the lines of both when making decisions along with your team?
Yeah, look, I think it's hugely helpful. I remember when I went through the London years in the Olympic and Paralympic delivery, to be the chair of the organising committee, but to always see through the lens, the optics of an athlete is really helpful. Look, I've always felt that if you get it right for the athletes, then you're getting it right for most of the project management. Because, it's for the athletes that you devise and develop your infrastructure. It's for the athletes that you create the world-class programs. It's for the athletes. 80%, 85% of everything that we derive in sponsorship from World Athletics goes almost entirely back to the athletes in competitions, prize money, world-class programs, development, delivery. It's always for the athlete. So I think if you see the world through the eyes of an athlete, it's not I'm not saying it's a deal breaker if you've not been an athlete and you still want to serve our sport. There are plenty of good people who can do that. But I do think it's helpful if you are heading up a sport to at least see it through the eyes of the athlete, because they are the most important people. If you're delivering it well for them, you're probably delivering it well for the rest of the project.
When looking at athletes, always want to be active, except for what they consider an off season, which they've had an extended off season. But looking at some of the athletes who want to get back into competition, who want to be out there, and with the Olympics scheduled for 2021 in July, obviously people want to ramp back up and get themselves into shape. But how cautious are you and your organization with making sure that the events that are actually taking place are done under the stringent and safest mechanisms for the athletes and officials as well?
It has to be. We have such a responsibility. Look, I want to get the athletes back into competition. I want to get them back into training. But we have a responsibility to make sure that when we are encouraging them to do that, that we are conscious that they are really important people. And, one of the reasons we were so keen to give a very clear message to the International Olympic Committee at the beginning of the lockdown period was that I sensed that the athletes were in an emotional turmoil. They were on a roller coaster. They were focused. They wanted to show creativity. They wanted to show that this wasn't going to get them down. And I sensed that if we didn't make it clear that this was the time to protect them, that they would possibly go off and do things that might be dangerous to themselves. And in this case, Earl, of course, dangerous to their families, because it's not just taking a training session. It's or the risk of having been infected or infecting themselves. The risk was that they would bring that back to vulnerable members of their families as well. So for us, it was really important that we protected them at that point. And when we were in a position to start encouraging them to get back into training, mainly because their own communities, their own governments, their own municipalities were giving them the go-ahead, sometimes to even leave their houses. That was important. But if we're going to offer competitions, then yeah, absolutely. We have to do the biodistancing. We have to make sure that everything is in place, and not just for them, because we had our first Diamond League meeting in Monaco the other day. We had 5,000 people in the stadium. We were allowed to sell 5,000 tickets. We sold all of them. But there is a responsibility when you've got local communities coming in to watch your sport, that you're also looking after them. You don't want to be responsible a few weeks later for, in a newspaper or one of these broadcasts being accused of having done stuff that's caused another spike. So it's been like treading on eggshells, as they would say in my country.
Yeah. Well, we know it's tough for young athletes, especially when it's age group championships, youth Olympics, and all the like. Coming up with a plan, because you're going to have some of the youngsters who will have aged out of competition, would have been there last year, this year. And what would you say to those athletes? Obviously, for next year, we saw the dates of requirements and eligibility. So for the athlete that is probably disheartened that they missed their final year of youth anything, such as Carifta Games, such as World Championships, what would you say to those athletes to encourage them to kind of keep going?
I would say, I'm clearly sorry that this pandemic has caused you to have a real disruption in your careers, and I understand that, and my heart goes out to you. I do. I was a former athlete. I know how I would feel. And sometimes it's worth remembering that, look, we all love sport. I'm guessing everybody watching this telecast loves sport in one way or another, either as an administrator, a technical official, a coach, a parent, a competitor. But sometimes you just occasionally have to see the bigger picture. And I would encourage all those athletes, particularly those in the junior and youth ranks that have missed those opportunities, to maybe have, as you said, Earl, the final season, the final competitive year, to look long term and to remember that even if they're junior athletes, they've probably been in the sport at least 5 or 6 years at this point. And each year they've looked to the next year. My mother always used to say to me, there are 3 things in life that you really want. It's someone to love, a meaningful job, and something to look forward to. And I would ask them to take the latter, look forward to making a mark in their career. Remember all the things that they did to get them to where they've got to. And yes, this is a disappointment, but if they go back and look at the history of our sport, they'll see some of the greatest performances in our sport have come from periods of adversity and periods of disappointment, and that they've just really got to focus on the future and say, look, this has been difficult for everybody. It's not just been difficult for sport, it's been difficult for people in the hospitality sector, people in the airline sector, people that have had to work on the front line in our health services to protect people. This has been unprecedented, and I'm afraid it's one of those things.
Yeah. Well, we know the president of the Bermuda National Athletic Association, Donna Reyna, had summoned you to Bermuda for the Carifta Games in 2020. I know that summons is due again in 2021. Do you still plan to attend if your schedule is available?
Oh, let me think about that. Yes. Yeah. No, I was really disappointed. I love the Carifta Games. I hadn't appreciated just what the Carifta Games meant until I went to my first ones 5 years ago now. I've never missed one. And my office will tell you, if they were on this call, that it's the first thing that goes in my diary every year. So, yep, I will be back as soon as it's safe and sensible, and Donna will marshal all the troops, and it'll be a fantastic competition.
How important are the Olympic Games to world athletics?
They're hugely important. They're important because they provide our sport the #1 Olympic sport. I think I'm allowed to say that, with an unbelievable shop window. It gives us a global footprint that is extraordinary. It is also important financially because, as you know, every International Olympic Federation has a share of the International Olympic Committee's broadcast revenue. And so that, for all our sports, is really very important. It gets channeled back into our sports and focusing on the development, the delivery, and all those things that make our sport what it is. And I just think that people look forward to the Olympics. It's every 4 years. It's not every year. And it has a really high cachet. All athletes, want to be able to walk away from their career saying, first of all, they went to an Olympic Games, had the great honor of competing for their country or their National Olympic Committee. And then ideally, if they dream long and hard enough and work long and hard enough, maybe they return with a medal. And the Olympic Games is very, very important.
The fact that there's going to be a 3-year window now from the Olympics to the 2024 Olympics, a lot of sports in between there will have to readjust their programs and their schedules. How difficult will it be for World Athletics to do so? Because, as you've indicated, athletics is a major part of the Olympics.
It was a big challenge. If you remember, I always thought the easy bit was going to be saying, well, I'm afraid, tough as it is, the games have been delayed. But as you know, the sporting landscape is a very complicated, interlocking jigsaw. You don't just pull one piece out and say, oh, well, the Olympic Games goes from 2020 and then it moves to 2021. We spent a long time trying to figure out how it would impact all the other events. And it's a good example straight away, of course. If you move from 20 to 21, you're then colliding with the World Athletics Championships that were due to take place in 2021 in Eugene, Oregon. You're sort of your part of the world, not quite,
yes,
but yes. Sort of your part of the world, NACAC. And then, but okay, so all right, you then move that, but you also suddenly are aware that you're moving that into a European Championship year and a Commonwealth Games year, yes. Which of course affects many in our region here. So those are all the big challenges. So I can honestly say that the knock-on effect of the games shifting from 2020 to 2021 has had a profound impact on our sport for the next 5 years. And that's just at the very highest World Championship level. Then you've got all the other events at area level, national championships, all those things have been impacted. So it was a very complicated matrix.
When did you decide to turn your attention to administration of sport at any time? When did you decide to do that?
I don't think I really decided. It sort of fell upon me because I'm really carbon dating myself now, but back in 1981, I was appointed as one of the founding members of the International Olympic Committee's Athletes Commission. Thomas Bach was one of the other members as well, and Kip Keino and Paul Schmidt, who then went on to become president of the country of Hungary. So it was an interesting group of people. And then through that, I was asked to join the United Kingdom Sports Council. I became a vice chairman in 1986. So although I threw my hat into the ring for the presidency of the sport of athletics when it became clear there was going to be an election in 2015, I'd actually been involved in sports administration for some time. And then I had a period out when I became a member of parliament and a government minister. And then I always say politics, when I left politics, actually politics left me in a very big way in 1997, because of course Tony Blair won the election and swept us all out of power. And then Tony Blair then asked me to become president of the bid and then the organising committee in London for the Games. So that was another 10 years. So when I was finally free of all my commitments for the delivery of the Games, I then thought I'd like to then focus a few years on a sport that has been very generous to me. And I owe everything to my sport. I owe everything to the fact I was a runner and I still run. So it's the gift that keeps giving.
I'm glad you mentioned 2008. Working with the Paralympic Committee, which was a huge undertaking for something kind of new to a lot of people. But given the opportunity to athletes that are a little different but still competitive as ever, how did you manage to rally people around to ensure that those games were just as important as the Olympic Games?
It was vital. And remember, I don't want to sound nationalistic or even jingoistic about this, but we're very proud in the United Kingdom about the history and our contribution to the Paralympic movement. If you remember, in 1948, it was Dr. Ludwig Guttmann who was the medical director at a hospital called Stoke Mandeville that dealt with a lot of the injured servicemen and women after the Second World War. But he had the fundamental belief that if you were treating physical injuries, you also had to create mental resilience as well. And so it was off the back of that he created this competition, mainly for wheelchair-bound ex-servicemen and women. And it grew from there. And it was his daughter that I asked to be the mayor of the Paralympic Village in London. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at the competitors that we've had, the Tanni Gray-Thompsons, the Adiat Apatens, the extraordinary David Weir, many times winner of the London Marathon and Olympic medals, it was a sport and a concept that everybody understood in the UK. So I just felt that it wasn't pushing against a closed door. It was actually pushing against a door that was well wide, and people really took to the Games. And it was the first time that the organising committee delivered both Games. So in the past, there had always been a separate organising committee, but we were the first organising committee. So I was responsible not just for the delivery of the Olympics, I was responsible for the delivery of the Paralympics. I was also held accountable for that. We were also the first organising committee to appoint a director of Paralympic integration, Chris Holmes, our most decorated Paralympic swimmer. And so he kept us honest and made sure that every service provision that was available to the athletes at the Olympic Games was also absolutely baked in for those competitors at the Paralympic Games. And I think we did raise the bar.
Yeah, definitely. The fact that now what you guys were able to set out has been that bar and trying to improve it year after year. But you mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to. What attracted you once you saw the Carifta Games? What was that thing that now makes you keep coming back?
The French would describe it as the joie de vivre. And it was just the joy that I recognized in the crowds, the athletes, the officials, and also just the jaw-dropping quality of athletics. One of the most popularly asked questions I used to get most popularly asked questions was always, still to a certain extent, slightly less now, what on earth are we going to do when, Usain Bolt leaves the sport? Where's the next Usain Bolt? And you'll have to pardon my English, but my standard response was, get your ass across to the Grifter Games. You'll answer that question really quickly, because there were some really great performances. And if you look at the history of our sport, and particularly those great athletes that have emerged from the NACAC region, and particularly the Caribbean, they've all been through the Grifter Games. Usain, all of them have come through the Grifter Games. And I think it is one of the most uplifting events in the World Athletics calendar. I never want to miss them again.
Right. We see, not only in this region, but globally, we see a lot of youngsters competing in athletics, whether it be cross-country, road running, track and field, or whatever. But then there seems to be some fall off as we get to coming out of college or university into the kind of professional world. How can we address that? Because most of the time people stop is because of financial. And especially in this region, it's very difficult to get that extra sponsorship to assist.
It's a great question, and it's a really big question. And I'm not sure we have simple answers to that. But you're right. The biggest challenge we have in athletics is the retention rate for athletes that sort of get to 18. Sadly, it's a sobering statistic. The vast majority of athletes that win medals in World Junior Championships are not actually always going to make it into their senior national team. And it's often about coaching. It's often about, education may finish for those competitors, and they're not in a school system. They may not go on to college. I think it's something we really need to look at, because we can't afford great young talent because of some real big constraints on finances or opportunities to go by the wayside. And it's something that we have started looking at World Athletics, and we do need to take it seriously, because it's heartbreaking to think that many of those great young talented athletes I watch at Carifta are not going to be in our sport once they've got to the age of 17 or 18. And that's something we do need to focus on.
During your time of competing, how has the sport changed to date?
In some ways it's changed a lot, and in other ways it hasn't changed enough. We're a very conservative sport, and sometimes I think that we need to be, and actually, funny enough, I've discussed this with Donna on many occasions, and many of my colleagues at Carifta and also on the NACAC Council. And it's important to make sure we get a balance of the two things here. The balance, of course, of holding hard to the philosophy and history of our sport, but recognizing that we do need to be in the entertainment business as well. We do need to attract young, fresh, new audiences. We do have to understand, look, my kids are, now in their 20s, but I know they see the world entirely differently from me. And when I sit and chat to young athletes, 15, 16, 17, they see the world differently. So we do have to move with it. But I think there's a balance. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Our sport is a pretty good sport. And at its best, I think it's untouchable. It's unassailable. But we do need to make sure that we continue to change. So yes, some of it has not altered. And I think some of it has not altered for good reason, because there's probably not much need to alter it. But I do think we need to focus on stadium presentation on TV, presentation online, of course. And we do need to make sure that we all look like the world that the young athletes live in. And that's also important for our federations.
Well, I do want to thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Bermuda in April of 2021 with the Carifta Games getting underway. I know you're looking forward to it, as Donna has indicated before, that it was on your calendar, ready to come and go, and but unfortunately, Corona had a different idea. But
Yeah.
hopefully, Corona has blown through, and we are on the National Sports Center track for the Carifta Games in 2021 with you present.
Well, I look forward to being there, and I look forward to seeing all my friends. And I'm hoping Donna's watching this. So, Donna, thank you for everything you're doing, not just for athletics in Bermuda, but also in the roles that you now have at World Athletics. I'm really grateful.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.